let me put to you, Fraser, if I may, as editor of the Spectator and also writing for the Telegraph, what you wrote last week, which is that you are beginning to ask about, is this global Britain? And what's happened to Brexit, which you voted for? And you were really casting doubt upon what this government is up to.
I was highlighting the potential, the gap between what Britain could be doing right now with all the Brexit powers and what it is doing. I think with Brexit, people can get so polarised over it. You can be thrust in some extreme corner thinking, oh, it's all Donald Trump madness, or oh, it's fantastic. Obviously, the rational place is somewhere in between. Now, Brexit has delivered so many things of benefit to Britain. It's killed populism, for example. We don't have we're pretty much the only country in Europe not to have a populist party in Parliament. It means, as Sweden knows perhaps better than anybody else, if you're trying to balance coalitions, it can be quite tricky to have political stability lasting that much. It's also restored public confidence in the border system. We will work in a democracy, live in a democracy. If you can't take the public with you, if your model of globalization, you're in trouble. So politically, it's achieved stabilizing factors for Britain. Now, it gives then, but Brexit itself, I never argued that it would be of itself a huge benefit economically. It was an opportunity. It means that we could reach higher if we wanted to, or we could fall further. All depended with what you did with the tools that you had. And also, it posed a very interesting question that the Conservatives as a party hadn't answered in the same way that no European EU members answered it. On your own, how free trade would you be? It's quite difficult to be in favour of free trade in practice because the benefits are dispersed, but the losses are concentrated. So you will always get special interests like the farmers' groups telling you, don't do a deal with New Zealand, don't do a deal with Australia. It takes a lot of political courage to stand up to them and think, no, I'm going to do this, and it's going to cost you. The sugar farming in Norfolk is going to end, but there's going to be some small reduction in cost for consumer prices. So it was never clear the Conservatives were going to have the courage of their convictions. My column last week was designed to highlight what David Frost, the Brexit negotiator, has mentioned himself. And that's if you look at our decisions, they haven't been particularly ambitious. We've done something like 66 trade deals. The vast majority have been rolling over whatever the EU did. When you look at the Australia free trade deal, not very ambitious at all, in my view, phased in over something like 15 years, as if it's a great terror that we need to hide ourselves from. So I think that the global Britain is a statement of opportunity, not an achievement. It's a statement of opportunity. All will depend if the British government pursues these opportunities. Right now, they use the language of free traders. Liz Truss talks as if she's signing free trade deals everywhere. But when you actually look at the way that she is hauled below the waterline when she does these deals by the protectionists like Michael Gove, like George Eustace, there's a whole bunch of Tory protectionists who are winning the argument inside of government. I thought it would be back in the back benches where they would be protectionists versus free traders. But no, the debate is happening inside government and the protectionists are winning. As somebody who believed in the potential of Brexit, I thought I'd flag that in an article.
And just before I come to you, Fraser, the UK has not rolled back the frontiers of the European Union. You wrote that very explicitly.
Yes, that was a rather beautiful quote from David Frost in his speech at the Thatcher conference last week. And you know where it's from, Andrew?
No, I don't.
It's from
the Bruges speech, no?
Yeah, exactly, the Bruges speech. Margaret Thatcher, in her famous Bruges speech, said a defining thing for Euroscepticism: we have not rolled back the frontiers of a state in Britain, only to see them reintroduced at a European level. That was the defining statement of the British Eurosceptic movement. David Frost didn't quote her, but he echoed it. People like Andrew and I will have known what he was referencing, when he was saying that we have not rolled back the Europeanisation with a Brexit vote, only to see it reintroduced by our own government. In other words, he was basically using Thatcher's words against Boris Johnson in a coded way, but given that he's Boris's Brexit minister, I thought it rather significant.
All right, now, Andrew, I've left Fraser to start the ball rolling.
Yes.
Because I need to ask you, why did you resign as vice chairman of the party?
A nice, easy question to start with.
Yeah, but if you're vice chairman of the party and you resign, then you are making a statement. You're not being removed by the Prime Minister.
No. I resigned for a number of reasons. Obviously, I wasn't entirely happy with every decision that we were taking as a government, otherwise I would have remained. But my primary reason, Nick, was to, I'm afraid, focus on the thing which we're going to be talking about, the evolving nature of our United Kingdom. And as you will be well aware, my constituency, I have a majority of 835 ahead of the Scottish National Party, who are agitating...
In the northeast of Scotland.
In the northeast of Scotland, who are agitating daily to break up our country. And my focus, my number one focus, has to be in fighting them in the northeast of Scotland and maintaining our United Kingdom as we go forward. And the most effective way that I could do that, I suspected, was to take a step back from my role as vice chairman and plunge even more deep into the world of Scottish politics and the fight to keep our United Kingdom together.
I think you did leave at the time when Fraser wrote in the Spectator, "Court of Chaos, Boris's style of government isn't working for him or his country," in mid-November.
Yes. Look, I mean, I can't sit here and pretend that I was happy with every decision that was being taken, nor in the way that those decisions were being reached. But my decision to step back was primarily due to the fact that we've got a real battle on our hands in Scotland. We need to beat the SNP. We need to keep our country together. I think it's in the best interest of Scotland and the wider UK, and indeed Europe and the rest of the world, the United Kingdom stays together, and that's my primary focus moving forward.
Okay, well, let's focus on speed of change, but there is change underway in the way that Fraser has identified, particularly the removal of populism and so on. What is the change which...
I'd like to say that was the case in Scotland as well, Nick, but we still, unfortunately, have a populist government in Edinburgh led by a populist First Minister, as I said, agitating every day against our government down here in London.
It's interesting, of course, that we're talking about the evolving Britain,
yes,
not United Kingdom here.
Yes.
An interesting technicality in the title. Fraser, where do you think things are moving at the moment? Because we have the unfortunate leaked phrases from the French president, not confirmed, about the state of the Prime Minister's mind, about him being a knucklehead, a clown in charge of a circus. But when you look at what you were talking about the global Britain that Brexit had said it was designed to achieve, that the global Britain is not being received well by our nearest neighbour.
Well, certainly Anglo-French relations are going through a rather difficult period right now. And I think that's...
You're understating it, aren't you?
Yeah. I know. And it's,
worse since Waterloo is what some are saying.
Yeah, well, we might not come to that, but, there's still time. But there's, I think that, there's no French president loses popularity by bashing the Brits and vice versa. And I think we're going to get a lot more of this up until the French presidential election. It's certainly that I really wish things hadn't worked out that way. I'm a big Europhile. I'm a huge Scandophile as well. And I really hoped that Brexit would mean that we had far better relations with the EU than we did. I hope the hostility of negotiations would not continue the trajectory, but it seems that is happening. But when you look at whether Britain is a global country or not, just look at this magnificent city that we live in. Just look at the way that Britain's, it's one of the most successful melting pots in Europe. We are connected by trade, by custom, by family to almost every other country in the world here. So you cannot define a country's attitude to globalism by simply the political debate. You need to look at the companies, look at who runs British companies. The vast majority are foreign nationals. You wouldn't get that in America. We're incredibly globalized, incredibly open-minded. And I think in London we've got the only true metropolis in Europe which embodies, I think, the hope and the future and the sense of optimism that led to the Brexit vote in the first place.
But I'm going to quote your own words back to you about looking all the time, not about drawbridge up, but going out into the world. And you were being explicit and saying you're worried that Britain is now isolating itself by its own actions.
I'm worrying that the government is not making as many trade deals and global alliances as it could do. But the country itself, again, you must simply look at the globalized way, the way that the new German government is going to be coming to London to raise money because it won't be able to get that from the German banks. I mean, London, the city, everything about our country is intrinsically globally minded. The most nationalistic prime minister could not take away the global-mindedness of the British people, the character and the courage of the country. And I think when we're talking about our country's economy and its own global-mindedness, we must be clear to draw that distinction.
Andrew, what's your response to that kind of language from Fraser?
Well, I agree with just about everything Fraser said. I too am a Europhile, a Scandiophile, and I voted Remain. And interestingly, I'm more positive about the future direction of EU-UK relations as we move forward. It's early days. I mean, Brexit only took place really, well, I suppose less than a year ago. The deal was signed and we actually left the European Union. And I think relations will improve. I very much hope they improve. I think everybody in this room hopes that they improve. And as Fraser says, I mean, this country is an outward, global, open country. You know, everything about the city, this country, speaks to how we welcome in people from the outside world to invest, to live with us, to contribute to British society. And that's not going away. I don't think it will ever go away. And from that, I take heart and confidence that we can get over these slight bumps in the road, and hopefully even more so when the French election is concluded next April or May, Franco-British relations can improve significantly as well.
Anyone want to come in? Please, at the back. And anyone else, please, here.
Just to say...
I can't see you, actually, so do introduce yourself.
Svante Ade from a number of organizations. I have to say, being a Swede here for the last 35 years, it is much less pleasant to be living in the UK, and the attitudes against people that are not necessarily national in the UK than it has been ever before, and it has got worse for the last 10 years. What is your comment about that? Because to say we are very open may be the case, but it's not what you feel, and it's not how Brexit actually affects families and private situations, financial situations. There is a lot of very negative if you are a non-British person.
Fraser.
Whereabouts do you live, Svante?
I live in London and in
Whereabouts?
Wiltshire. And in Wiltshire.
Whereabouts in London?
Kensington.
Right. I wouldn't have thought it's too rough in Kensington for foreign nationals. But I don't.
I think it's representative of a view which is growing, Fraser.
Well, I don't know. Look,
I
can understand, having Swedish friends that I do, that people can see in Brexit, they can read into it a kind of xenophobia which you would struggle to support by looking at by the opinion polls. I mean, if you look at the number of Swedish nationals in London, there are quite a lot. I would have really thought that when you look at especially Kensington, I mean, Brits are in the minority. I'm in the minority in where I live in West London. It is. Look, I don't doubt what Svante says. Well, of course, but we're both from the northeast of Scotland, so
we're usually in the minority.
Yeah. Oh, I don't know.
No, but there's something quite substantive here, and I'm glad it came from a Swedish voice rather than me putting it on behalf of the Swedish voices. And it's something you're hearing more, not just about Swedes, but about a lot of international people who are saying they feel it is no longer as welcoming and as practically, and I hear a couple of people supporting this.
Well, look,
please come in.
Just very quickly, there's no doubt that that's true, because if you want to move people over, if I want to move my wife's father over to live with us, for example, I can no longer do that because of Brexit. Now, that is those barriers, and there are lots of them. I've got Swedish friends here who want to come and work in London to doing some part-time work. They can't do that now. I've got to fill in all of these forms. My kids have now got to fill in passport forms. Of course, these barriers do reinforce the distance between countries. I'm not wild about that, but that is the inevitable result of leaving the EU and trying to realign globalization in a more democratically acceptable way. I wish that wasn't the case, but that's the price globalists like me have got to pay for a more democratically acceptable settlement.
Andrew.
Yeah, well, firstly, I would say I'm sorry that you feel that way, and I'm sorry that there are obviously people in the room that feel that way, because it's not something, I can't argue with how you feel as an individual, but what I would say that the numbers show there are more foreign nationals living and investing in the United Kingdom now than there was even before Brexit. And like Fraser said, of course, barriers have been thrown up. It's not something I'm particularly keen on. I face exactly the same challenges that Fraser faces, having also a Swedish wife with family just outside Stockholm. So I understand completely why people look at Brexit and see it's much more difficult to be a Swede, or indeed any European national living in the UK. But you only have to look at the amount of European nationals that applied for settled status, in upwards of 4 million. They obviously feel that their homes and their futures are here in the United Kingdom. And as I said, more foreign nationals living in the UK than ever before. And that, for me, is a very good thing. But we cannot argue with how an individual feels or how you perceive people to be acting towards you. And I'm really sorry that is the case. And hopefully that will change.
But it is addressing the speed of change, and there's a change of attitudes which is being reflected here, and that surely should be worrying, particularly after what you wrote last week about the global Britain attracting people from outside, Fraser.
I'm afraid to say, if you try to substantiate the idea about Britain turning against foreigners, turning xenophobic, it is impossible to find any qualitative evidence supporting that. If you look at the opinion polls, we are one of the countries that most welcomes immigrants, that regards immigrants as being the biggest single strong. I mean, there was a saying I heard from a Swede, actually, that Britain doesn't like immigration but loves immigrants. And I think there's a lot to that. If you look at the employment differential between Brits and non-Brits in Britain, it's negligible. That's not the case in Sweden. So I think if you actually look at all the main indicators of how well we integrate outsiders, foreigners, we don't even use that word here. So I would, of course I hear that with Brexit. I don't for a minute. If I was a foreign national living in EU national living here, I would feel the cold winds blowing towards me as well. But when you look at this country right now, the biggest complaint you hear is that there's not enough foreign nationals coming here to work because we really need them and we miss them.
Andrew?
No, I have nothing to add.
Okay. Does anyone want to actually just pick up any of these points? I'm not taking the microphone away from you, but please go ahead.
Ulrik Almqvist, Danske Bank. Two very quick questions to Fraser. Isn't the overwhelming reason we don't have a successful populist party in England, taking Andrew's point about Scotland, I mean, it's the first past the post system. And secondly, isn't there a risk that the state-bearing Conservative Party is turning into a populist party?
Right. Just quickly, it wasn't so long that Britain had the European elections where Farage's party came first. It was huge in the opinion polls as well. I'm talking about the opinion polls or Parliament. You're right that the first past the post would stop a party of 7 or 8% getting into Parliament, but we don't have populists at 7 or 8% or anything close to that. And so when you're looking at barometers of stability, I think that is worth taking into account. Of course, the argument I thought you were going to make is look at Boris Johnson, isn't he a populist? Now, it's tempting to say, but again, you've got to work out what's a populist. A populist tends to be an anti-systemic party, etc. I wouldn't quite say the Conservatives fit that description, although I know some people would respectfully disagree.
I've got two questions here about exactly this. Challenging your point about Brexit removing populism, hasn't Brexit just allowed populism to win? We didn't have a populist party in the Commons before Brexit. And secondly, again anonymous, how can Fraser say that Brexit killed populism in the UK? Boris is the definition of a populist.
Yeah, a populist isn't a politician who you don't like. That's not the definition of a populist. If you want to take any serious definition of the word, then the components, you get somebody who uses the language who claims to be talking about the people versus the system, etc. It's pretty difficult to say that this Oxford-educated guy who can recite the Odyssey in ancient Greek, who represents the oldest political party in Britain, is a populist. I mean, he's not a Donald Trump-style interlocutor. But again, it's what is a populist? I would say a populist isn't somebody who you think shouldn't be in politics. A populist is somebody who shakes his fist at the whole established order and defines himself against it, and usually claims the exclusive right to speak for the people versus the elites. That's not language which the Conservative Party uses, or Labour Party.
Andrew, how do you take on populism in northeast Scotland?
With great difficulty, because it's tied up with nationalism and a sense of identity and who you feel you are, and so that's very much an argument of the heart over the head, and so that is a challenge that we have to face, and it's a challenge that we take on readily and very positive about the battles ahead. But just to address the point being made about the Conservative Party being a populist party, I mean, it couldn't be further from the truth. I mean, the Conservative Party is a popular party. I grant you that. It's the most successful political party in the history of the world, and has reinvented itself in many ways over the hundreds of years that it's been in existence. Actually, going back to our argument about protectionism versus free trade, that's an argument that's been raging within the ranks of the Tories since Peel repealed the Corn Laws, and the argument still rages today. But it's not. I think it's quite lazy to actually describe Boris Johnson as a populist and the Conservative Party as a populist party. You only have to engage with an average Conservative member of Parliament to find out that that's not the case. The average member of the Conservative Party, the average voter for the Conservative Party, they are not voting for populist politicians or populist policies. They're voting for a party that they think can deliver for them in their daily lives. And they voted for a party that they knew, the only party actually in the election last time, that was going to, in Boris's words, get Brexit done, deliver on something that had been rumbling on in this country for 2 years and holding us back from moving forward.
Can I add 2 small points to that? I'm not sure there is more ethnically diverse cabinet in Europe than there is in Britain. Yep. So it's the idea that this is a nativist party doesn't square. Secondly, Boris, when he's mayor of London, called for an amnesty for illegal immigrants. How many people are in power now who've ever advocated that position in Europe? It's not very populist to me. So those are two things that I would just bear in mind when trying to work out, is this a nativist populist party?
And climate change, we certainly wouldn't be taking the action we are on tackling climate if we were a populist party or Boris was a populist politician, because out there in the country, it's a very difficult argument to tell people they're going to have to get rid of their petrol car, they're going to have to install new boilers and all the rest of it, change how their houses are insulated. That's not populist policies, that's the right policies, but certainly not populist.
Okay, well, that addresses one of the questions here about how politics in this country is going to move forward on the green priorities and necessities, because at the moment the current government doesn't seem to be, even though it hosted COP26, it doesn't seem to be engaged on the absolute speed of what is necessary to meet the UNFCCC targets.
Well, I mean, we were the first country in Europe and the G7 to legislate for net zero. We were cutting emissions faster than any other country.
I hear that, but
second after Sweden, actually.
Sorry, second after Sweden, of course. How could I forget?
I hear that, but many say it's still not enough.
Well, we are going as far and as fast as we can without doing irreparable damage to the economy, and you've got to take people with you. You know, you can't just, declare overnight that we're going to ban petrol and diesel cars. We don't have the infrastructure in this country to do that, for example. So we're investing in charging networks all across the country. We're encouraging people to invest in electric vehicles. I'd like to see a scheme like they have in Sweden, where people are giving grants to purchase electric vehicles. I think that would be something we should reintroduce into this country. That would move us further down that route. We've got a 10-point green plan. We've got a net zero strategy for the North Sea. We've got a North Sea transition deal now, so we're going to be the first net zero basin in the world off the coast of Aberdeen. And you just have to look at the technologies that are being developed with government support, with government funding, the research that's going on in British universities. I think we're moving further and faster than just about any other country in the world, and we can be quite proud of what we're doing.
Do you reckon, and this is addressing a question here, do you reckon the party and the government is addressing enough the real anxieties of the next generation who are going to, quote, inherit the earth, but feel powerless to influence, according to this question?
That's a very interesting question for you to ask me. One of the role that I had was as vice chairman for youth within the Conservative Party, and I do worry that we're not doing enough to talk to and address the concerns of the next generation, a generation who's been impacted more by lockdown, a necessary lockdown, but impacted more than any other, who saw their life chances curtailed, their university education cut back, schools closed, all the rest of it, and are now emerging into this post-COVID world that looks very different to the world that me or Fraser emerged into when we were circa 23, 24, 25. And they are, one of the top priorities for them is, of course, the climate. So, yeah, we do need to engage more with them, listen to their concerns, but we also have to understand that we are governing for the entire country. We have a responsibility to the entire country and to the economy, and we need to go as fast as we can without doing irreparable damage to that.
Fraser, how do you address, given what you wrote about the court of chaos, the way the Prime Minister behaved with the Confederation of British Industry Monday last week, quite apart from Pepperear and losing his place for 21 seconds? The fact is that they were disappointed by the kind of message that is needed at a time of economic difficulties and challenges, with so many of the indices now looking the wrong way, with inflation predicted to be 4.6%. In other words, a disjuncture between the politics of the centre and the necessities required by business.
Well, he certainly could have prepared for that speech a lot better. I heard the cleaned-up version of it that evening, and it actually was coherent.
Afterwards?
Yeah, I did, yeah. He gave it another version of a speech in 6 o'clock in the evening, which was president. His point with Peppa Pig was a great example of British intellectual property that's been copied everywhere. You know, it made sense
Like
when
Angry
he got the
Birds.
words right. Now, you got to remember with the CBI, they were the #1 adversaries of Vote Leave. So if this is what people don't quite work out. The CBI, people think, oh, that's the voice of British business. As far as Boris Johnson's concerned, this is the individual voice of corporate interests who stood athwart him as he tried to. They were almost ahead of Remain in the great sort of enemies that Vote Leave faced. So there's a sort of backstory there, which you have to remember. And yes, of course, he should have been more prepared for that speech. It wasn't a particularly good look. But for as long as you've got a Labour opponent who looks in no danger of taking power, you do tend to get, I'm afraid, lazy government. And much of my criticism right now is that there is just sloppy, lazy government from Boris Johnson because he does not feel Keir Starmer breathing down his neck. He thinks the next election is almost in the bag for him. And despite my many criticisms of him, I would say that right now he's probably right, unfortunately.
Helen, do you want to come in? We're almost at lunchtime. Andrew, do you accept some of the critical data that's out there, particularly when it comes to inflation, when it comes to gas, when it comes to caps and so on? Now, I'm saying that in front of an international audience, but on the other hand, the international audience is looking at the record, looking at the responses and saying, we're not hearing enough, which is substantive and addressing this.
I think it's the biggest challenge. I think inflation and the cost of living is the biggest challenge that we are going to face over the next few months. It's an international challenge. It's not just a UK-only challenge. And I think we will be judged on how we respond to that, frankly. And myself and every other member of Parliament will be watching and judging very carefully the decisions that we take as we move forward, yeah.
Anyone else want to come in? Please, at the front. Let's get the mic.
Great. Thank you very much. My name is Susanna Silvesol. I'm from the Swedish Embassy. Very nice to hear your remarks today. My question relates to global Britain and the UK's increasing focus on trade with the Indo-Pacific and countries in the region, such as CPTPP, this trade bloc. What else do you think that the government can do to promote trade, closer investment relations between the UK and the EU and countries such as Sweden? And specifically, I noted with interest in the recent export strategy, there's a great focus on support through the government's new export support service, it will actually focus on the EU to start with. So could other initiatives be similar, in a similar direction? Thank you.
It's difficult. I mean, it's a very good question. How can Britain improve right now a relatively tension system with the EU? And Britain does pretty good for Swedish imports. I was in a pub last night drinking this warm Swedish cider that they've made, and England's got the best apples in the world. How come we're importing cider from Sweden? That's how much we love Sweden. Anyway, so it is. I think that it could. I would love, for example, us to do some unilateral kind of tariff abolishing. That's my orientation. Politically, that's difficult, but I would quite like to see, as we do have the power to do that, I'd like to see more of that. And of course, there's a whole load of bureaucratic hurdles that no Swede living in London will be unaware of. And I think a lot of these were unexpectedly big, and I think these can be removed at a far faster pace. So I think the greater awareness, I think, needs to be made of the non-tariff barriers, the kind of bureaucracy, which I think this government can do a lot more to reduce than it is doing already.
Well, thank you both. Is anyone else burning to say something to Fraser and Andrew?